Hello and welcome to this episode of the Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding podcast. There may be no major language as different from English as Chinese. Chinese is written in characters rather than with an alphabet. It is a tonal language with consonants and vowel sounds absent from English. It is completely without conjugation, and tenses are expressed very differently to what English speakers might expect. Translating Chinese to English is no simple task. Anyone who reads Chinese literature in translation will find themselves wondering about this process and what might have been lost in translation. To learn more about translating Chinese literature, I spoke to Nicky Harman. Nicky is a British literary translator who also teaches the art of translation. Nicky, would you mind starting by introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm a Chinese to English literary translator. I found it absolutely fascinating and engrossing and really a huge privilege to be able to do it. So I started by studying Chinese at Leeds University. Then I dropped it for a number of years, but then for the last 25 years, I have been reading Chinese literature and translating it into English, and mentoring other translators and working on our registered charity, Paper Republic, which is a website promoting Chinese literature in English.
You described it as a privilege. Can you just expand on why it feels like a privilege?
Yes, I got this feeling very distinctly with one of the first books that I picked up. Must have been in the 90s when I'd come back to Chinese. And it was a memoir by a Taiwan journalist. She was actually the first Taiwan journalist to visit China in the 80s or 90s. Anyway, a terrible thing had happened to her. Her apartment in Taipei had been broken into. She'd been assaulted and quite badly injured. And she wrote about it and about her shame as a woman in saying what had happened to her. And I read this book. I didn't actually translate it. It's called Memoirs of a Survivor. And I felt hugely privileged to have read that. No one who didn't understand Chinese could have read that memoir. And it was groundbreaking and very moving and beautifully written. I wish now that I had translated it, but I didn't know much about translation in those days. I just felt very privileged to be able to read this, and it was a short step from that to thinking, well, I should translate so that I can offer that opportunity to English language readers. And whatever the book is, whatever the story is, I can read it, I can put it into English, and then other people can read it. And that was really how it grew from there at the end of the 90s and onwards.
And looking back over the last 25 years, how has the Chinese fiction scene changed in that time?
Oh, it's just expanded beyond recognition. I mean, you think the novel, which was, it wasn't a novel, it was a memoir, Wild Swans, that was so influential. And there were a number of what were unkindly called misery memoirs about living through the Cultural Revolution and so on. Things are completely different now. I mean, we're talking, the writers now are the children or grandchildren of those writers of the 1970s being translated in the 1980s. And you have all kinds of literature. I mean, everything from sci-fi to gritty urban stories to books, very interesting books written by women writers, poets, children's literature, young adult literature, classic epic novels, which often have a rural background, but not always. There's just about every possible kind of writing, and at least one example of each has been translated and published in English.
And for you personally, what's the most exciting thing that's going on in Chinese literature and publishing in 2026?
There's a contemporary woman novelist, Lu Min, who is very active in Nanjing. She actually is quite a big name in the Jiangsu authors 作家协会, the Writers Association. But she's a very ambitious writer, and I think I like that about her. A lot of the well-recognized male writers write enormously long books. This is not necessarily good news for Western publishers because basically they see words, number of words, they see money that they've got to spend in getting it translated and published. But some of the men do write hugely long books, not so many of the women, but Lu Min has been extremely ambitious in her last two novels, and I think this is a wonderful thing. She wrote one called Golden River, which is about a business dynasty and an ill-fated man who tries to get his children to take over from him because he knows he's dying. And it is enormously ambitious and it is fascinating. It's not actually about the countryside. It's all about their life in the city. So it's very, very up to date. I mean, one of the things you could say about traditional, as it were, Chinese novels that win lots of prizes, that they can often be set in the countryside, which is more difficult for um, Western readers to empathize with, because on the whole, we don't come one or two generations from peasant stock. And understanding what that life was like, and is still like, is quite difficult. But her novels are completely contemporary.
Chinese is obviously a very different language to English and very different in some very fundamental ways. What do you think are the unique challenges of translating into English from Chinese?
I suppose they're twofold. From the purely linguistic point of view, I know I'm going to annoy translators from European or Latin languages if I say this, but you simply cannot follow the language and plod along translating one word into another word. I know this is very unjust, and I don't think I really want to be taken seriously because translators from Latin languages, of course, they don't do that. They recreate it as I do, as a novel in the English language from whatever language it came from. But there are virtually no props,
Hmm.
no supports. You can't say, oh, I've got here a sentence with adjective, noun, verb, um, adverb, and so on. You don't get that kind of support because if you try doing it like that from Chinese, it reads quite badly and doesn't engage the reader and doesn't do justice to the writer. So, as with other languages, which are very different, Korean, Japanese, obviously, um, and Chinese, you really do have to recreate your version in English, which gives you more freedom, but also gives you more responsibility because you are still translating. You have really got to recreate the novel in an English version as it was in the original. So there's that responsibility. You are still translating. If I say you're recreating it, I don't mean you go off on a frolic and invent things of your own, because you don't. And of course, the other thing is that the cultural background and the literary conventions are different. We've talked a bit about length, but at a more basic level, you've got references to things which happened in China's past, more recent past, or the Cultural Revolution. We've got things which I believe are called tropes, references which are not easily understood by readers. You've got to decide how much to explain. As a translator, I don't really have to explain what the Cultural Revolution is because most readers will have a kind of general idea, probably enough. But, there are other things that maybe I should gloss because we don't really use footnotes nowadays. For example, different kinds of pancakes, different kinds of bing and different kinds of bao. I think we all know that a bao is a dumpling, more or less, but there are hundreds, thousands of different kinds. If you just call it a dumpling, you're maybe suggesting to people it's something like a German dumpling, which it's not, or they're not. So how much how much do you have to help the reader? How many references do you have to gloss over, add a little to? With every novel, it's a different challenge. With every
Hmm.
paragraph, it's a different challenge.
And has there been like for you personally as a translator, has there been a particular philosophy you've applied in trying to resolve that incredibly difficult problem?
I think that I find inspiration and support from many other translators from many other languages. And every time translators get together, this is what they talk about. So there's no easy answer, but it's something that I think about all the time, and I know many other translators do. And the thing about having taught translation, which in a small way I have, is that you're discussing it with your students all the time, and there is translation theory to back it up. And there's also one's own experience and gut feeling. I think you really have to respect the original writer. And that is my guiding principle. But on the other hand, I also have to do a balancing act. The reader's got to enjoy reading it.
It's really interesting you said this because I read an interview with Jay Rubin, who's the translator into English of Haruki Murakami's books. Very popular translations from Japanese rather than Chinese, but again, a very different language. And he said that when you read Haruki Murakami, you're reading me, Jay Rubin, at least 95% of the time. Do you think that's true of translation generally, or translation specifically from East Asian or very different languages? And does that reflect your experience as a translator?
Uh, mm, yes and no. Yes, it's true. Every word that the reader reads are my words, my choice. And I've had to make choices about those words, and particularly with East Asian languages. I'm making choices all the time. There is really no way I'm going to be translating word for word and hoping that that's good enough, because it's not. On the other hand, as I said, uh, I'm not the original author, so I have to I have to respect what the author. I have to try and convey the effect that the original author is trying to convey. So a comic novel has to be comic, a tragic novel has to be tragic, and that's what I'm working towards, getting that effect. Uh, the other thing is that I never wanted to be an original writer, just because, let's face it, I really don't like thinking of beginning, middles, and ends. I'm working from an original author, and they've done all the hard work of creating the narrative. Um, so, from that point of view, I'm very glad I'm a translator and not an author.
Got kind of a follow up question on that. So, do you find yourself focused on bringing through the voice of the original author or primarily on delivering good prose style in English? Another way of putting that might be, is the primary duty of a translator to the reader or to the original writer?
Yes, I think it's to recreate the voice of the author. As I said, if you have a comic novel, it's got to be comic in English, and you've got to. That's it, really. It's to recreate the voice of the author. The author depends on me and people like me for their persona in the English language. And sometimes you get authors who can read English pretty well and write pretty well. So they often have views of, how they ought to sound in English. It has never
Mm.
been a problem for me, in the sense that they've always been very positive, but sometimes they have quite strong opinions. Other times they can't read English at all, and so they're completely in my hands.
Excellent. I can I can probably guess. Which do you prefer?
I've never had a bad experience with a living author, so I actually do like it, um, if an author has opinions, but it's fairly rare that they're gonna discuss style with me. It's really only happened once,
Mm.
and it was a very interesting experience.
Mm.
But on the whole, most writers, they answer my questions, which is great, and they leave the rest to me. And yeah, so that's a big responsibility. I can't go missing stuff out because they trust me.
Yeah.
It's a relationship of trust.
Is that experience something you're happy to talk about, that discussion over prose style with an author? What was the discussion?
Oh, well, it was Yen Ge, who is an author who now writes in English and lives in the UK.
Mm.
And it was her novel, 我们家, which was translated as The Chili Bean Paste Clan.
Mm.
Um, and there was quite a lot of swearing in it. And she basically was disappointed that in English we don't have so many creative ways to swear. So we had a lot of fun thinking of new ways of cursing people.
Yeah. Well, we're quite strong. We've got quite a small range of swear words in English. They
I
can be a bit
know,
more. They can be a bit more inventive in Mandarin, in Chinese.
exactly.
When you're translating really great prose, do you ever get frustration of how am I going to deliver how compelling this is in English? Do you ever find yourself straining against your own abilities as a English prose stylist?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Um, and obviously, as you say, the better the writer, the greater the challenge. There's one woman writer that I'm very excited about and have actually signed a, a I've signed a contract with an American publisher to produce a collection of her short stories, and she is a brilliant writer. Her name is Ling Shuhua. She died in 1990 at quite an advanced age, so I have absolutely no chance of finding out from her what she meant by certain things. She had a classical education, so quite a lot of her language has classical influences, Wenyanwen influences, which is difficult for me. Is even difficult for my very educated Chinese friends if I ask them, what does something mean? And also difficult to source the meanings of those particular collocations. It's on the whole, it's not the individual characters. It will be a phrase
Mm.
of 2 or 4 characters. Um, so she writes very well, and she writes incredibly engaging stories. She was also quite a well-known painter, and so a lot of her writing is very painterly. And I find it incredibly difficult sometimes to do justice to her writing because I know that she had a vision in her head. She had a vision of a certain landscape, which was the setting for a certain scene. Now, I can't see that landscape. I can't go back. I can't even say to her, look, show me one of your paintings. Is it like this or like that? So I have to recreate in my mind how I think, what I think she was seeing in her mind. And there's no knowing whether I've got it right or not. Although she did write a very interesting essay about how to read Chinese paintings. So I've read that and tried to get inspiration from it. But you see, she's bringing in a whole other discipline, the discipline of painting as well as the discipline of writing. And that is very difficult to translate.
Mm. Is there anything you think will always be lost in translation from Chinese into English? Anything from the original that's just something that will always that an English translator will always struggle to convey?
I I don't think there are any general rules. I mean, as a translator, I just have to keep trying to get as much into the English um, as possible, and it's never going to be exactly the same because apart from anything else, the English language reader is going to receive it differently because their own experiences as a reader and in life are different. So they won't receive the references in exactly the same way. They won't have been in that landscape, so they won't see the mist in quite the same way.
Hmm.
If it's a a story which is set in a background of mist-covered mountains. The mountains in their mind will be different, and in my mind, be different.
Yeah.
So, but there are no general rules.
Yeah. And is there a word or expression you find yourself wishing that English had?
Actually, there's a word I wish that Chinese had. I'll go back to Ling Shuhua, one of her. She stopped writing her short stories in the 1930s, but she did write some essays and reflections after that. And she wrote a rather beautiful one about mountains I have known. And I was translating it this week. It will be the last story which goes into this collection that I'm preparing for Cambria Press. And obviously I was aware of this before, but I realized how difficult it is to translate into English the word shan, because shan is mountain, but it's also hill. And in her essay, she's talking about the Scottish Highlands and a rather small hill in Singapore where she lived for a while, as well as the mountains of Japan and the mountains of China and the Jungfrau in Switzerland. And mountain just does not do it. You could, at a pinch, talk about the Scottish mountains, but usually we use the word highlands. And the Jurong hill in Singapore is really not a mountain. It's just not big enough. So, in other words, Chinese has this word, shan, but we have hills and mountains, and we make quite a clear distinction between them. So that's not exactly the question you asked, but it's certainly been challenging me this week. It's the other way round.
And I read a fair amount of translated fiction. I often feel as a reader, you can kind of distinguish prose translated from different languages. Like there's certain stylistic patterns that, for me, come through even with different authors or translators. Is that something you've picked up on? Because I know you speak languages other than English and Chinese. Like, do you think there's something, even when prose is translated, there's something that's recognizable about one language from the other?
Yes, but I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. And it can sound quite clunky if someone has stuck too closely to the original structure of the language. Sometimes the skeleton of the Chinese shows through. Sometimes that's okay. Um, and it can add some flavor to the English, but quite often I feel it's not actually what the author intended. So what the author intended, of course, sometimes I'm guessing, but my judgment would be that the author intended a certain paragraph to read rather more smoothly and not to terrify the reader by jumping out in a rather odd structure and making it sound clunky.
Yeah.
Um, so,
It's,
yeah,
it's interesting you say clunky. I was kind of thinking, like, sometimes when I read Chinese translated into English, I think there's a bit of a terseness there in the sentences. Do you know? I don't know if that's something you've.
yes, I think you're right, and I think you've put a finger on one major difference, which is that English is very dependent on conjunctions to join one thought to another thought. And Chinese less so. So yes, it can give the impression of being a bit staccato, and you're thinking, well, what does X have to do with Y? How did we get from here to there? And so I'm quite keen on using conjunctions to link up, providing I can see the link myself. If I can't see the logical link myself, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, I think it is hard to understate quite how different Chinese is from English for someone who's not like tried to learn it. Like the lack of conjugations, the lack of conjunctions, and like yes, it's subject verb object, which is about the only similarity, but it's just in every other way, it's completely
Oh.
different.
There's
Um,
something I'd like to add to that, which is that I have a theory, which I've never really done enough research on it to prove it, but I do remember talking at one of the early Writers' Association's meetings in China some years ago now, um, about how Chinese uses colours and body language to indicate moods, whereas English, we're much more used to hearing or reading a mood described in words. I could describe it as the Freud effect. We expect to read about feelings being analysed, and Chinese is much more likely to go something like, she went pale. She went pale. And you're thinking, did she go pale with fright? Did she go pale because she was going to be sick? Did she go pale with anger? And so in English, you're much more likely to say something like, she went pale with anger. Whereas Chinese just, she went the equivalent of, she went pale. And the writers who I was talking to about this were all tickled pink. They thought this was very funny. And we didn't have the use of PowerPoints at the time, so I'd actually printed out, because the word being used to describe someone's face in this particular example I was giving was qing, the character qing, meaning green, blue, black, nature-coloured, whatever, or ghastly pale, or whey-faced. And so I had I had a picture of a green face, and I said, "This is what you're presenting to the English language reader. You've got to put in another word. It's just not enough to say she went green in the face or ching. She went ching in the face, because the English language reader has absolutely no idea what you're talking about." And in fact, it was a couple who were going off to get divorced, so they were not very happy with each other or with the situation. And this word qing came up to describe their facial colour, but I had to add something like, whey-faced or wan-faced or something like that. And the writers thought it was hilarious. And in fact, one of the writers who'd been there mentioned it to me years later. So it obviously stuck in their minds.
Now, do you think that's because, like, just in the because the Chinese readers so much it will be embedded in the Chinese cultural context, and they'll know that, like, pale means this in that context. Because obviously Chinese people have different ideas about what color means, and probably more stronger feelings about what color means. Would you think it's just it's they're more comfortable with things being a bit more elusive in the text? Or do you think it's something that would be clear to a Chinese reader, or do you think it's something that a sort of ambiguity the Chinese reader is a bit more comfortable with?
Yeah, well, all of those, yes. I think they're going to understand more easily because they're more used to the different ways in which this particular greeny, bluey, blacky, grey, whey-faced qing is used in relation to faces. But they're also just used to a more elusive style. So you can have these dramatic emotional scenes in Chinese novels where it's all expressed in the body language, whereas we would expect to read a grand emotional outburst minutely described. Um, so I just think it's a slightly different way
Yeah.
of dealing with emotions in literature.
Now, moving on, can you tell us a bit? Can you tell the listeners a bit about Paper Republic and the work you do there?
Yes. Paper Republic started not actually with me, but with a man called Eric Abrahamson, who was living in China and knew a number of other translators who were also living in Beijing at the time. They used to get together and they set up this website basically for communicating with each other, and it included a blog, and all sorts of interesting thoughts about translation were posted up there. Anyway, in 2007, 8, I first met them, and we had. I wasn't living in Beijing, but I met them in China, and we had the possibility of getting a UK grant, providing one UK taxpayer was involved in it. And so I became part of the group, and we set up this database of translators and writers, and we continue to post blogs, and we've done a number of projects since then. One of the things we did was to register as a UK non-profit, UK charity, a few years ago, and this has been quite useful, although not particularly useful for getting any money out of it. So we're still a band of volunteers, and people come and go. There are a couple of people living in Beijing. Andrew is one who's currently involved, then some in the UK and a couple in America, and one in Spain. And so we do things like we produce with a small amount of money. We have short fiction pieces, which we make free to view and post on the website. So we have no actual physical office. It's all online. We help with children's translation competitions, the Anthea Bell competition, and we do anything that we have time to do and are that we've got enough money to pay translators. So it's fun. It's quite exhausting, and I'm sure we could do much more if we had a bit more money and better organisation. But we do the best we can, and we're the only one of our kind.
So I'd really recommend everyone listening to check out the Paper Republic website, and I'll put a link in the show description.
It's .org, not .com. If you go on .com, paperrepublic.com, you get some people who sell you kinds of paper. So it's .org.
I'll make sure there's a link in the show description.
Okay, thank you.
More generally, it's quite an interesting and perhaps slightly fraught time for translation as an industry, because you've got AI coming in, and AI is very good at translating in some senses, but I think AI is a pretty terrible prose stylist. How do you find that AI is affecting the work you do?
Well, it's an ongoing discussion. I think none of us, and by us I mean translators, from any language or into any, we don't really know. I think that the AI-generated product of translations from European languages are more immediately under threat because a reasonable version can be produced. I don't know. We have to see, and the reason we're discussing it so intensely, particularly in Paper Republic, is that we want to publish translations that we know have been done by a human agent. So it's okay to use AI to help with your research. That was the kind of thing you used to be able to do, still can do, with browsers anyway. And I've used ChatGPT to research 1930s Chinese, where, as I said, with Ling Shuhua, there are classical influences that I can't source in any other way. But everything you do, I, as a translator, am ultimately responsible for what I write down. That has to come out of my head. And if any research that I've done on through AI or through a browser, I have to be responsible for double checking that because it's quite often wrong. So it's, but on the other hand, I talked about the Anthea Bell competition. This is children learning how to translate, and we've just been marking the Chinese entries they do from other languages as well. And the children, the students, are told you mustn't use AI. We will spot you if you do. We'll find out. But I'm not entirely sure that we can be quite sure whether they've used it or not. I did actually find one entry which I was fairly sure was AI generated. So it's an ongoing discussion. I mean, computers and using computers to help with translation has been around for 30 years, more than 30 years. It's just got, you could say, slightly easier, but also more seductive. You often get ri ridiculous results. So, um, what's in store in the future? I don't know. AI is a terrible translator from Chinese at the moment. Quite often wrong, very clunky, can't decide whether something should be written in the past or the present, whether it's I, you, he, she, or it. I don't regard it um, as a competitor to my translation, but who knows what's gonna happen in the future.
And we spoke earlier about how the establishment influences like the big prizes and the big publishers, they tend to really shape what gets picked by a Western publisher for translation. Do you think the political environment, whether in the West or in China, do you think that does that have an impact on what gets picked for translation?
Well, I think publishers are only human beings. They're naturally going to be affected by what they hear and read around them. Um, if you're asking whether I think there's an anti-China bias, it's hard to prove, but possibly there is a bit. It doesn't operate in quite the same way with Japanese and Korean fiction.
Didn't quite necessarily mean like a bias, but just like, does what the current Western concern about China might be one thing or it might be another thing? And do you think that just colours the what subjects that the publishers are interested in publishing about?
Um, I don't know.
It's
I
okay
wish
to
I
say
could.
no if you don't think so.
I wish I could look into the mind of publishers. I mean, I do think that, um, I well, um, let's talk about, a book which came out last year or beginning of this year, which is quite an interesting example. Um, it's come out with Penguin, translated by Jack Hargreaves, and it's Hu An Yen's. It was
Mm,
translated as I delivered parcels in Beijing, and it's a memoir. It's a memoir of being a delivery driver. You wouldn't immediately think that is great literature. On the other hand, they were very keen to get it, and it's had a huge amount of publicity. I don't know how well it has done or is going to do. Why did they choose it? Possibly because it's entirely personal. And I think one thing that publishers and possibly readers too are a bit leery about is getting these grand narratives which push a political viewpoint. Now, if you're getting the memoir of a DD driver, a delivery driver, there's not going to be anything. It's going to be entirely personal. And from that point of view, it can be very appealing and engaging to the reader because we all want to know that Chinese people are pretty much the same as us, have the same feelings and same experiences.
mm.
So what is personal can be very appealing when you read about it.
And what are you working on at the moment?
I'm working on this 1930s short story collection, the feminist writer Ling
Ah,
Shuhua.
yes.
I'm, I mean, I've talked a bit about that. Um, I'm also working on another woman writer who is very much alive, Lin Bai. I'm co-translating her first major novel with another translator, Mike Day, and that hopefully will come out next year. Um, and it's a wonderful, also very personal novel. It's kind of semi-autobiographical, and absolutely not political. What else? Another woman, it just so happens that I'm working on various women writers at the moment. A young woman called Annabelle Yang Hao, who is actually living in Dublin at the moment, and with the same translator, Mike Day, we're working on a new collection of short stories of hers, a completely different style of writing, very speculative, and we translated her novel about a young man who is obsessed with video games, Diablo's Boys, and what's coming up next is her short stories. So various different things. As I said, one thing that I love about the translating life is the fact that you get these completely different kinds of writers. And so each translation is a completely different experience.
If listeners have heard this and they want to try out some Chinese literature in English translation, who would you recommend starting with?
I'd say you've asked me an impossible question, but I could recommend that people go to the Paper Republic Translations by Year, which we put out every year, where you'll find everything that's been translated from Chinese that year. And Andrew Rule actually laid it out very beautifully last year. You can look at the 2025 list of translations, all with illustrated book covers, and they'll find there, they can just browse through. I mean, it's impossible to predict who's going to like what book, but we do this list every year, and it's a fascinating dip into the kind of fiction that's coming out of China. So the Paper Republic Translations by Year is a good place to start, especially last year's, because it's more than just a list. Give you an impression of what the book is about, and then you make your choice. If you don't like it, try another one.
So, just to end, would you mind giving a reading from one of your translations?
Yes, I'd love to. I wondered which book, which piece I should try when you first asked me that, and I realised that one of my absolute favourite books is a memoir by a man called Rao Ping Ru, and it's Our Story, and it's a memoir of his life with his wife who died rather prematurely, and he was grief-stricken. And what he did was, because during the Cultural Revolution, and before and after, all their family photos got lost. So he taught himself to paint, and he produced an illustrated memoir, which is called Our Story. His surname is Rao Ping Ru. And it's a wonderful story of their life together. He was actually arrested and was not able to be with his family for many years. So the tragedy of his wife's life was that she brought up their 5 children and then became ill and died. So they never really were able to enjoy their final years together. But I'm going to read a tiny bit from the beginning, where they have an arranged marriage and his father takes him to meet the bride and the bride's family. So this is the first time he's met her. And then a bit from the end after she's died. So they've arrived at the house where his intended bride lives. After the boat docked at Jiujiang, I took a train to Nanchang City and then went straight to number 18, Shenjia Bridge. The next morning, my father and I took a long-distance bus to Linchuan. I only had 2 weeks leave, and my father was in a hurry. It was late at night by the time we arrived, and we checked in at the Kaohsiung Inn. Once we were settled, my father told me a bit about the family of the girl in question. Mr. Mao Zedong was a close friend, and they were well off. The next day, we set off for Meitang's house. It was large. We walked through 2 courtyards and were about to enter the main hall of the third when I suddenly saw a small window in the west building open up. I looked more closely. There was a pretty young woman, about 20 years old, holding a hand mirror to the light in her right hand and applying lipstick with her left. She did not see me, but I knew it must be her. This was my first real impression of Mei Tang. Then, after a long and eventful life together, Mei Tang has now died, and he says this about her passing. And I still find this an extremely moving passage. In middle age, we too were parted, and the family faced much hardship. Mei Tang used to implore me to take care of my health. She said that once the children were independent, she would come and live with me in Anhui. If we're in good health, then when we're old, we can go out for walks, see a few films, buy ourselves something nice to eat. That would be wonderful. That was the kind of woman she was, innocent and fun-loving, asking little from life. What kept her going during the decades of hard work was the thought that one day we would be able to live together in peace and happiness. And late in our lives, things did settle down. Heaven must have been watching over me because I survived 2 major operations and made a full recovery. It was Mei Tang who became ill. She was worn down by years of chronic kidney disease, a poor diet, and increased immobility. Her wishes were so simple, yet remained unfulfilled. Other lives we cannot divine. This life is finished. And lamenting over it is fruitless. On March 23, 2008, Mei Tang's funeral was held at the Longhua Funeral Home. I wrote this poem of lament. We endure the most difficult of times, and gradually our lives become better. But heaven granted us so few years together, and today I grieve bitterly, because now you are gone. Who can anticipate the vicissitudes of life? I have been through good times and bad, and am disillusioned with this earthly world. I long only to be reunited with you in the next life. And that was the beginning and the end of our story. Of course, there's a lot more to read in the middle, so I recommend that book to everyone too.
Perfect. Nicky Harman, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a great, I'm going to use that word privilege again. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you about Chinese fiction in translation.
That was Nicky Harman. The Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding is a charity which has worked to promote understanding and friendship between the British and Chinese peoples since 1965. If you would like to find out more or get involved, visit saceu.org. It is our AGM this month, and if you're interested in attending, you can find out the details on any of our social media pages. If there are any other topics you would like to hear this podcast discuss, or if you have any feedback, please contact us via the email in the show description. The music is Chopin's Grandvalse Brillant, Opus number 18, produced by Gregor Quendel and released under a Creative Commons license. This podcast was written, produced and edited by me, Joseph Edmonds. Goodbye.